ในคลิปนี้จะเป็นคลิปสุดท้ายนะคะครึ่งชั่วโมงหลังก่อนที่การประชุมจะสิ้นสุดลง
Hello, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Abel. My name is Kansas Lohmeyer. I am a junior at Elkhorn South High School and was born and raised in Omaha. My question is directed to Greg Abel. Berkshire Hathaway is the second largest utility provider in the United States, and a 2025 Reuters investigation found that the coal fleet is the dirtiest in the nation. There is currently no concrete plans to retire coal and fully transition to renewable energy. I'm 17 years old. Considering that, what do you have to say to young people like me who will live with the consequences of climate change caused by companies like Berkshire?
Thank you for your both your question and your comments, because it is important to understand say Berkshire Hathaway Energy, but also how they operate and maybe using Iowa at least as a starting example, because I think that was one of the states cited in the report. One of the important things that I'd say early in us acquiring our energy companies, and I go back to when we acquired Mid-American, we acquired it in 1999. Berkshire purchased Mid-American in 2000. But one thing that became very clear to myself and our teams was that what we do within our utilities is really driven in two fronts. One, we absolutely have to meet the requirements and the law that's laid out federally. But most importantly, we had to recognize we implement public policy across these states. And that was an interesting conversation when I go back to Iowa. And again, the report cited that as a significant problem. It was early in the 2000s when, for the first time in Iowa, we were going to, as a utility, be short power. So we didn't have the energy, and we entered into a significant discussion with our governor at the time, and really sat down and said, where do you want us to go as Mid-American? And what resources do you want as a state? And at that time, we were predominantly a coal-based state. And we recognize that, obviously, and fundamentally, personally viewed it as a risk. But we needed to have that conversation with our state, and as to how we would manage that going forward. The interesting thing was that as we had that conversation in the early 2000s, again, with the leadership of our state, it was clearly decided we wanted to continue to be long power, so i.e. not be short for our customers. We discussed the type of resource, and I remember a very clear conversation around we wanted to stay balanced across a variety of energy sources. And at that time, it was really coal and natural gas. And at that time, we made the decision to build the largest wind project in the U.S. in Iowa. So we undertook an effort to build three resources: a coal plant, a gas plant, and what was the first wind project we owned in Mid-American. And again, it was very consistent with what the state wanted, but we also laid some important groundwork there because we started to define the importance of renewable energy, non-carbon resources, but it has to be consistent with what the state wanted. And we've gone on since that period of time to deploy $16 billion into Iowa associated with renewable energy. Again, very consistent with what our state wanted us to do, i.e. the underlying policy. We don't get to make that decision and just spend $16 billion. It's done in conjunction with our governors, our legislatures, our regulators. And at the same time, we've had the opportunity to retire 5 of the 10 coal units. Now, as the report highlighted, I understand people would like those other 5 coal units retired at this time. But to think we deployed $16 billion to retire 5, and it's a very good outcome for our customers. We've been able to maintain our rates. They're some of the lowest in the country. So it's been done very efficiently. But the reality is we still need those 5 coal units to keep the system stable. We cannot have a Spain-Portugal situation. So we absolutely respect the input. We absolutely respect the process, and we'll continue to work with each of our states to identify the path they would like to chart. And we work hard to ensure there's good, balanced outcomes because we recognize the challenges they're associated with other folks' desires. So I think you'll continue to see our utilities implement policy consistent with the needs of their stakeholders, their customers, and at the same time always respecting what's required by any of the federal standards. So thank you for your comments. Okay, 31. Let's see, Becky.
This question comes from Billy DeRoss. He writes, Mr. Buffett, as a nurse from New York State, I've spent years struggling to secure good health insurance for myself, even while working on the front lines to save lives. In New York, accessing insurance means navigating a confusing state-run system that feels like it's designed to overwhelm. I'm curious, what ultimately led to the end of your healthcare venture with JP Morgan and Amazon? And given your commitment to value and long-term thinking, would you ever consider taking another look at health insurance reform in the U.S.?
Yeah, we're spending close. It's hard to get the precise figure, but close to 20% of GDP on health. And if you go back to 1960, there were a number of countries that were each spending around 5%. And then the lines began to diverge dramatically. But the mathematical fact that there are only 100 percentage points in the equation didn't change. So we tried that experiment with JP Morgan and Amazon. And we had 3 people that didn't think they knew the answer, but thought that, in my case, I used the term that it was a tapeworm in the economy. And we also found out that the tapeworm was alive in every part of the country. I mean, the hospitals liked it. The hospitals had prominent people who worked with people. People generally liked their doctor, didn't like the system. I mean, all kinds of things. But in the end, J.P. Morgan and Amazon and Berkshire were not going to have any effect on changing that 20%. Now that 20%, there are only 100 percentage points available, and none of the countries spend 6 or 7%, and perhaps use our system to their advantage, which is also very true. That is an enormous percentage of an economy, and we simply, that it was too entrenched to really do much in the way of change. And we spent some money on it, and we did some work, and we learned a good bit about our own systems. And we saw the degree to which the present system was ingrained in so many people's, whether the healthcare providers or everybody, and these aren't evil people. I mean, they're just going about something and trying to save lives. But we found that whether it was in Canada or France or Britain or wherever it might be, that if you looked at our costs, that they were just far higher, and to some extent we were subsidizing the rest of the world, and people would come to the United States to do the really unusual or challenging aspects of health in terms of operations and that sort of thing. But we made no progress. And there comes a point where, well, the government's, and it's so involved in the situation, and health is so important to everybody. And we couldn't, as I said to Jamie and Jeff, I said, well, the tapeworm won. And there are problems in society when you get 20% of your GDP going into a given industry. The degree of enthusiasm for changing that industry, the political power that the industry will have, and that doesn't mean they're evil. And everybody, they just end up there. And so I don't know we came to the conclusion we didn't know the answer, three of us, and we had the money to do it, and we didn't know how to change how 330 million people felt about their doctor, felt about their health care, what they felt entitled to, and it won't change by itself, and government is the only one that can change it, and the only people in government that can change it are getting a majority of 435 people and 100 people, and my dad lost one election in his life in 1948, and he was a very strong Republican. And in 1950, he went back and beat the guy that beat him in 1948, and he got the doctors behind him. And he did they're very well, and they believe 100% of what they're doing. They're helping people every day. And during the pandemic, the sacrifices made by people save other people, just incredible. Can you imagine working in something where they're bringing in people that are, going to die by the dozens and dozens and dozens, and you try to somehow keep your own morale up and keep working with them. So you can't argue about the importance of it, but our costs are so different than any country in the world that it's a huge element, and we're a very rich country, so we can do things other countries can't do. And through our elected representatives and a whole variety of things over time, we've developed a system that is enormously resistant to any kind of major change, and it's important in every community that it's in. So I wish we had an answer for you, but I was somewhat pessimistic going in, and I was a little more pessimistic when we came out. But I'm glad we did what we did, and we learned something about our own failings in the process. So Berkshire, in effect, got its money's worth, but we didn't kill the tapeworm. Okay, trying to change things in government it's an interesting proposition in the country because you get self-selection, in terms of the people that go into government and continue in it. And to some extent, they have to make decisions that they don't like as they go along, and they learn to accept them or to rationalize them or whatever it may be. But it's still about, this country's worked out better than any country in the world. So but you can't argue it was a failure, but you can argue that there are certain problems that are terribly tough to figure out ways to solve. And of course, one of them gets back to the fiscal problem I mentioned before, because it's easy to spend money and it's hard to cut people's receipts. And if you get elected, you're going to say to yourself, well, I can do more good if I stay in than if I really vote my conscience on this sort of thing. So you give away a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there, and finally you don't recognize yourself in the mirror anymore. And I grew up in a political family, and I watched how people behaved, and they behaved like human beings, which is what you have to expect. And I behaved like human beings. So we still managed to keep moving forward in dramatic ways. It's so much better to live here than it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It's dramatic. So you can't say the system's a failure, but you can say that it is very difficult to make major changes in it. Okay. Station 5.
Hi, Warren Gregg. My name is Ping Huang Chen. I'm from Taiwan. This is my 7th time here. First of all, I want to thank you, Warren, for your generosity of sharing your wisdom and lesson. You changed my life, and you're my role model and my hero. And my question is, Warren, you mentioned that Mr. Apple would be in charge of capital allocation in the future. And I'd like to know your perspective on, is it easier for a business operator to be an investor or for an investor to be a business operator? Thank you.
Now, that's a good question. I see we call him Mr. Apple even. Yeah. Thank you. You'll take it. It's a lot tougher to be an operator. I mean, it is. It's easier to sit in a room like I do and play around with money. It's just an easier life. That doesn't mean it's a more admirable life. It doesn't. But it's been actually been a pleasant life for me, so I don't complain the least. And I've been able to choose my friends, which has made an enormous difference in my life. I've never had to work for anybody that I really didn't admire. I mean, that's a luxury in life. I had 5 different people I worked for, and they were fantastic. Whether it was with the manager of the local Pennies, which is located, it used to be located a couple miles from here, and newspaper managers, everything they had. I've never been really disappointed by any teacher I've had. So, but I would have to admit that I've been able to choose what I do with my day to an extraordinary degree compared to be a business operator. And in many cases, I wouldn't like to compete to be a top-notch business operator in terms of some of the behavior that might be forced upon me. I am the master. I mean, I've found myself in this position where I can run the kind of company I want to run, and that's an extraordinary luxury. And with that, I should say that I'm getting a section that says 5-minute warning, exclamation point, 5-minute warning, exclamation point. So I would now like to turn to a subject that I want to discuss with you a few minutes, and then when I'm through discussing this, I'll let Becky ask me a question or two, which you may want some elaborate questions that come to you as I make these comments. Tomorrow we're having a board meeting of Berkshire, and we have 11 directors. 2 of the directors, who are my children, Holly and Susie, know of what I'm going to talk about there. The rest of them, this will come as news to. But I think it's the time has arrived where Greg should become the chief executive officer of the company at year end, and I want to spring that on the directors effectively, and then give that as my recommendation. Let them have the time to think about what questions or what structures or anything that they want, and then as the meeting following that, which will come in a few months, we'll take action on whatever the view is of the 11 directors. I think they'll be unanimously in favor of it, and that would mean that at year end, Greg would be the chief executive officer of Berkshire, and I would still hang around and could conceivably be useful in a few cases, but the final word would be what Greg said in operations, in capital deployment, whatever it might be. I could be helpful, I believe, in that in certain respects if we ran into periods of great opportunity or anything. I think that Berkshire has a special reputation that when there's times of trouble for the government, that we are an asset and not a liability, which is a position that's very hard to have because usually the public and government get very negative on business if there's a time like that. But so I think there might be a time when I'd be helpful, but Greg would have the tickets, and he would make, like I said, whether it's acquisitions, I think the board would be more welcome to giving him more authority on large acquisitions, probably if they knew I was around. But he would be the chief executive, period. And like I say, the plan is to, and Greg doesn't know anything about this until what he's hearing right now, but that, yeah, the board will be able to ask me questions tomorrow as to a little more of the specifics of what they should be thinking and all that. But they'll digest it, and then at the next board meeting after that, if we, as I would guess we would, if they act, then obviously we have something to announce to the world. It's a material change in Berkshire, and we'll go forward with that operation, and I will play with a Ouija board or whatever, and that comes out in terms of doing things. But I will not. I have no intention, zero, of selling one share of Berkshire Hathaway. It'll get given away gradually. it, it just one. Thank you. Okay, drink your Coke and calm down. I would say that I would add this. The decision to keep every share is an economic decision because I think the prospects of Berkshire will be better under Greg's management than mine. But you know, I will come in and there may come a time when we get a chance to invest a lot of money, and if that time comes, I think it may be helpful with the board the fact that they know I've got all my money in the company, and that I think it's smart. And I've seen what Greg has done, so that's the news hook for the day, folks. And thanks for coming. Yeah. The enthusiasm shown by that response could be interpreted in two ways, but I'll take it as a front. Thank you.
Chair, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
และทั้งหมดนี้ก็เป็นเนื้อหาทั้งหมดของการประชุมนะคะที่ยาว4 ชั่วโมงครึ่งแล้วก็คุ้มค่ากับการดูนะคะแล้วก็ได้ฟังหลักคิดแนวทางในการลงทุนแล้วก็การใช้ชีวิตของคุณปู่วอร์เรน บัฟเฟตต์ด้วยเดี๋ยวจะมาบอกความรู้สึกหลังจากดูคลิปให้อีกทีค่ะสำหรับคลิปนี้ลาไปก่อนค่ะบ๊ายบาย